Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Heather from Sault College. Thanks for joining us today. I think we'll probably have a few more people joining as things go on. I suspect there might be some classes getting out at noon and people might jump on late. But if not, then we'll have a good chance for a ratio of question and answer toward the end. So I would like to welcome everyone today, and I would like to thank Elizabeth Long and Zia Sumar for joining us. They're going to be providing you with an information session. They're a great support to Sault College students, and they have a lot of experience, and they're here to help give you important information and answer some of your questions. Some housekeeping: please put all of your questions into the question and answer box and not into the chat. And please remember, questions, if they're very case specific, if they're very personal to you, most likely you'll be asked to set up a consultation. So if it's a general question, sometimes it can be answered, but please remember, if it's very personal, it might not be. So with that, I'll pass it over to Elizabeth. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us. It's always nice to be here with you guys. All right, let's get started. All right, so today we're going to be talking about some of the most important things that you guys need to know as international students. And we're going to start off with some things that you need to know while you have temporary resident status. So while you are a student and later on as you hold a work permit, what do you need to do and what do you need to know in order to study and work legally in Canada?
The first thing is to make sure that you always have status while you're here in Canada, right? So very important to check your permits, look at the dates that are listed on your actual study permit, your work permit, know what is listed there in terms of the expiry date. If your study permit, for example, is expiring before you complete your program of study, it is really important that you apply to extend your study permit. Okay, so that you can continue studying here in Canada and finish your program. Now, one thing to keep in mind, one thing to understand is that when you submit an extension application, as long as that extension application is submitted properly and before the expiry date that's listed on your permit, you'll hold what's called implied or maintained status while you're waiting for a decision on that extension application. So as long as you have applied for that extension before your expiry date, you can continue studying in Canada while you're waiting for IRCC to actually process that extension and application and give you a decision. Does require you though to remain in Canada, right? So you do have to be physically in Canada while you're waiting for that extension application to be processed. Now, let's say you wake up and you realize that, oops, I missed the deadline on my study permit, on that expiry date that's listed on the permit. Well, from that expiry date, you have a period of 90 days to apply for what's called restoration. So for someone who has lost their status, you can apply to get your status back by submitting a restoration application. Now, really important to keep in mind the deadlines, though. IRCC is very strict on this. You have 90 days from when you lose your status to apply for restoration. So if you've missed the deadline on your study permit, or if when you applied for your extension it was refused, keep in mind that you have a period of 90 days to apply to restore. So for those of you who miss the expiry date, you have 90 days from the expiry date that's listed on your permit. If you've applied for an extension and it gets refused, you have 90 days from the refusal letter or from the refusal decision to submit a restoration application.
So, Zia, what happens if someone did file an extension in time before their current study permit expired, but their study permit was rejected? Let's say their study permit, it was filed, let's say it expires on May 30th, but they filed it on May 26th, and then it was rejected on August 30th. on what date does the 90 days start? Does it start on August 30th or May 30th when their study expires?
Yeah, it starts on August 30th, right? So they have 90 days from the decision letter to submit a restoration application.
Right. So it's always from the day. And so if you have maintained status, you applied before, then you have it until that decision is made. So you had status until the decision is made. Okay. All right. Now, the next thing we wanted to talk to you guys about is the difference between high-skilled work and low-skilled work. So these days, while you are studying, you're allowed to work. And when you graduate, especially, you'll be looking for work. When we move on to talk about permanent residence, you'll see that it is very important that you know whether or not the work that you do is high-skilled or low-skilled, because almost all, there's just a very few group of very specific categories, but other than that, almost all permanent residence applications are based on high-skilled work. Okay, so what's high-skilled work? What's low-skilled work? Well, to figure it out, you have to go to what is called the NOC codes, the National Occupation Classification Codes, the NOC codes. And the NOC codes are divided into 6 tiers. Tiers 0 to 3 are considered high-skilled, and tiers 4 to 5 are considered low-skilled. Now, you know, the whole system for the NOC codes changed just last year at the end of the year. And so before that, a lot of jobs that were previously considered low-skilled now have been reclassified as high-skilled. For example, truck drivers or personal support workers if you're working at institutions. You know, tattoo artists, other sort of jobs, you know, that were low-skilled or high-skilled. But there were a few occupations that previously was high-skilled that are now low-skilled. So, you know, don't just rely on what your friends did or what other people did. Because the laws change so much, you really have to have a proper advice on what is your own situation and whether or not your own positions qualify as high-skilled or low-skilled. So I put a link here for the complete list. By the way, we will be sending you guys a recording. We upload all the recordings onto our website, lmlawgroup.com/videos. And we'll also send you a copy of these slides as well. Okay. All right.
So on that study permit, there are conditions that we've talked about, right? Like the expiry date that's listed, that's physically listed on your study permit. There's other conditions that are implied on you that you're expected to follow, even though it may not be physically written on the permit itself. And one of the most important ones is that you must be actively pursuing your studies. What this means is that IRCC expects that while you're here in Canada on your study permit, that you're always making progress towards the completion of your program. So you're always enrolled in school, you're always working towards completing that program of study. If you stop studying, whether that's because you finish your program early or you decide that you're no longer interested in studying anymore, your study permit actually becomes invalid 90 days from when you stop studying. So regardless of what is listed as the expiry date on your study permit, you may have a year left on that study permit, for example, your status, it actually still becomes invalid 90 days from when you stop studying. Okay, so for example, if you have a study permit right now, that's valid until 2025, March 2025, for example, but you finish your program of study in August of this year, then from August, you'll have the period of 90 days where your study permit will still be valid. But after that, despite the expiry date dating March 2025, your study permit will be invalid. So you will not be in status in Canada. There are 2 exceptions to this. The first is if you're on a regularly scheduled break. Now, when we're talking about scheduled breaks, IRCC is very specific as to what qualifies. A scheduled break is anything that is in the academic calendar for your program at your school. So it has to be one that's actually listed as part of the program, part of the academic calendar for your program. A scheduled break is not one that you decide to take on your own. So for example, if you have a program, if you're doing a 4-year bachelor's program and this regular academic calendar for your program is 2 semesters of school, 1 semester summer break, then that summer break is considered a regularly scheduled break. Now, if you're doing a program that does not have a summer break and you decide, you know what, I want to take a break for the summer, and so you just don't enroll in classes, but your program was still expecting you to be a student at that point, that summer break is not a scheduled break, and so that becomes problematic. The other exception is if you're on an authorized leave. So situations come up, you know, something may come up and you decide that you need to take some time off from school. It could be for family reasons, for medical reasons, whatever it may be. There is the ability to take an authorized leave from your program of study. Now, you do have to let the school know, you do need to get it in writing that you are on an authorized leave, but that's the other exception to the rule that you have to be actively pursuing your studies. So either you're on a scheduled break or you're on an authorized leave. The study permit also allows you to work while you're studying. So as long as you are a full-time student, you're able to use your study permit to also work while you are studying. Now, this ability is only for full-time students, so you do have to make sure that you are registered as a full-time student. And the rule is that while you are in your program, so while you're studying, you can work up to 20 hours a week during the school year and full-time during any regularly scheduled break. Okay, so up to 20 hours a week during the school year, full-time during any scheduled break. Definition of scheduled break is the same as we've just talked about. The only exception to the requirement to be a full-time student is if you are in your final semester of your program, and in that final semester, you do not need to be a full-time student in order to complete your program. So in terms of how many courses you have left, you know, you can finish your program without having to be a full-time student, then you can be a part-time student and still maintain the ability to work using your study permit. Okay. Right now, IRCC has a temporary policy in place that allows international students who have a study permit that they either applied for or held on October 7th, 2022, you are allowed to work beyond that 20-hour week cap. So if the study permit that you currently hold right now was applied for, or you held it before October 7th, 2022, then up until the end of this year, that 20-hour cap does not apply to you. So you are able to work full-time during the school year, even though you're on a study permit. Now, the ability to work using your study permit only applies while you are a student. So as soon as you've received any confirmation from the school that you've completed your program, that means you are no longer a student and you do have to stop working. You can no longer use your study permit to work. When we're talking about any confirmation that you've received from the school, it can be, it's basically anything in writing that tells you that you've met the requirements of your program. So it could be a letter from the school, it could be an email from the school, it could be your final grades being released, anything that indicates to you that you have met the requirements of your program. That also tells you that you are now no longer a student and you do have to stop working immediately. The exception to this is if you are going to be doing another program of study. So if you finished your first program and you know that you've already been accepted into a second program of study, and you're going to be continuing on with your studies, you can continue working even though you're done your first program of study, so you can work between your programs. as long as the gap between the two programs is less than 150 days.
So Zia, just sort of, let's run through a timeline. So if I am a student and I have, I'm still doing my final exams, can I work then?
Yes. Yeah, because you haven't finished your program. You haven't received any confirmation that you're done your program. So you are still a student. So yes, you can still work.
Okay. What if I have finished my exams, I don't have my grades back yet?
You're still a student, you can still work.
What if I got my grades back and it indicates I passed everything and that I have completed my program?
So then now you've completed your program, you are no longer a student, you do have to stop working.
And then when I apply for my postgrad, which we'll cover in the next slide, then what happens?
Then you can start working full-time.
Great. Okay, so let's talk about the postgrad work permit. Now, the postgrad work permit is what I like to call a golden ticket. It really is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for students to be able to not only work in Canada, but very importantly, get the work experience you need in order to apply for permanent residence. That being said, when I say it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, I really mean it is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, because for the most part, a person is only allowed to apply for one postgrad work permit in your lifetime. There has been in this year and the last year, and since during COVID and since COVID, the government did allow some people whose postgrad work permits were expiring to apply to extend, but those are based on exceptional circumstances. It's because of certain backlogs that the government faced, and it's certainly not something that you can count on that will continue next year or the year after. You can't really, count on exceptional circumstances. For the most part, for someone such as yourself, I would highly recommend that you think about the postgrad work permit as a once-in-a-lifetime deal. Now, what that means is if you only have a postgrad work permit for once in a lifetime, you really have to figure out how you can get your permanent residence while you still have the work permit. Because once the postgrad work permit expires, it can be very difficult to get another work permit. Okay, so your length of your postgrad work permit will really depend on the length of your program. So if your program is between 8 months to 2 years, you only get that period of time. It's 1 year program, you get 1 year work permit. If it's a 2-year program, you get 3 years. Or if you do a 1-year program and then you do another 1-year program right afterwards, then or that you complete within 2 years, then you get a 3-year work permit as well. Now, some people might be able to get permanent residence with just a 1-year work permit, but many people will have difficulty getting the work experience that they need. Maybe they need a 1-year work permit, or getting a job offer that they need, depending on which category you qualify for, okay, with just a 1-year work permit. So that's something I can't say each person what you need. We need to have a consultation with you. We need to take a look at your entire circumstances to provide you with proper advice as to whether a 1-year work permit or even a 3-year work permit would be enough. Now, what do you need to do? Let's say you want to apply for a postgrad work permit. What do you need to do in order to qualify? Well, one of the main things you have to have that the officers look at is, did you have full-time student status throughout every semester of your program? There are 2 exceptions to the rule. One is authorized leave, and one is the final semester. So authorized leave, if you take the entire semester off and you have permission by the school to do so, then that's okay. Or if you're taking the final semester off, you're taking just a few courses, you don't maintain a full course load in the final semester, that's also okay. But other than that, every semester must have you studying at full-time status in order to qualify for the postgrad work permit. Okay, so let's say you qualify and you want to apply. Now, when can you apply? The website, the IRCC website says that you can apply 180 days. I'm here to tell you, don't look at that as the rule. If you look at that as the rule, you apply 160 days after you completed your studies, likely your application will have been rejected because you would have lost status by then. Okay, so think about this rule for yourself. Apply within 90 days of the completion of your program. Why do I say 90 days? It's because of one of the first things Zia talked about when she talked about your status. Remember, you lose your status 90 days after you completed your studies. So in order to qualify for postgrad work permit, you have to have a valid study permit. And even if your study permit expires after the 90 days, you lose your student status within 90 days. So you would have had to apply for restoration of status if you apply after the 90 days. So do it before the 90 days and do it while your study permit is still valid. Whichever comes first, that's your deadline. If you apply within that deadline that I told you, 90 days or before your study permit expires, then you can start working full-time immediately while you're waiting for your work permit to be issued.
Elizabeth, if we did a program that's 1 year in length, how long would my postgrad work permit be valid for?
So normally that would be for 1 year.
And if I do a program that's 2 years in length, then how long would my postgrad
Then it
work?
would be 3 years.
And what if I do a program that is supposed to be, let's say, 2 years in length, but I do it in a year?
So if you're in an accelerated program where the program is normally 2 years, but you yourself are very smart and you're able to do it in 1 year, then you need to get evidence from the school saying that it's an accelerated program. It's normally a 2-year program, and then you may be issued a 3-year work permit.
Perfect.
Thank you, Zia. Okay. All right, let's move on to permanent residence. Okay, so the first category that I'm going to talk about is called express entry. Most of you would have heard about express entry. It's one of the most popular categories, but it's also there's a lot of misunderstandings about it. So let's get into it. So first of all, how does express entry work? Well, in order to qualify, you have to first create an online profile. And you get to create an online profile if you qualify under one of 3 categories: the Federal Skilled Worker class, Canadian Experience class, or the Federal Skilled Trades class. Once you qualify, you enter into an express entry pool. And you get to be in the pool for 1 year. But now make no mistake, just because you've entered into the express entry pool does not mean that you have applied for permanent residence. When you enter the pool, you haven't applied for anything. You've just indicated your willingness and the fact that you qualify for express entry to become a candidate, to be invited to apply. When you enter the pool, you'll get a series of points based on your background and based on whether or not you have provincial nomination that's related to the express entry, that's linked to express entry, and you'll get your points. Now, every couple of weeks or so, the government has a draw where they look at your points level, and sometimes they also look at how you qualified and whether or not you have provincial nomination. And if your points are high enough and you're in the category that they wanted to apply, then they'll give you an invitation to apply. It is only after you get the invitation to apply that you would be able to apply for permanent residence. Okay, so let's first look at how you might qualify for to get into the pool. So there are three categories. The first category, the federal skilled worker class, many of you may already qualify, even if you don't have work experience in Canada, because this category is meant for people who are outside of Canada or people who are inside Canada, and it's the work experience. You can use self-employed work experience. You can use work experience outside of Canada, work experience while you're studying, but it has to be 1 year of high-skilled work experience that's full-time and continuous in one occupation. And then we add up the rest of your points. You have to show that you have enough financial savings, and then you could qualify for this category. Now, the second category is called the Canadian Experience Class. The Canadian Experience Class work experience is very different from the federal skilled worker class. The Canadian Experience Class work experience requires that you have 1 year of high-skilled work experience in Canada when you are not a full-time student. It has to be employed. You have to be employed by a Canadian company. Employed means that you are getting a T4. You are getting salary deducted from your your income is deducted from your, what am I saying? Your income tax is deducted from your salary, okay? And EI and CPP is deducted from your salary. You also can't be working for yourself or for a company that you are controlling as well, okay? So don't think that you can just, create your own company and then hire yourself, okay? That's the most important part of the work experience. And then you have to pass the language exam. Most of you should be able to pass since you're going to school at Sault College. The third one I'm not going to go into. Most people don't really use this. If you qualified for Canadian experience skilled trades, you probably would qualify for Canadian experience class as well. It's for people in the trades, okay? So now that you've taken a look at how to get into the pool, let's take a look at what you need to do to get the points to get you out of the pool. So what gives you those points for express entry? First of all, age. When you get to your 30s, every birthday is no longer a happy birthday, okay? So every year it's -5 or 6 points in your 30s. When you get to your 40s, it's -10, -11. By the time you get to your 45th birthday, the good news is your points don't go down anymore. The bad news is you get a 0 for your age. Compared to someone in their 20s who has 110 points, that's significant. Education. Education, if you have 2 post-secondary programs from anywhere, one of them should be at least 3 years, that really gives you a boost with your points. Language, if you don't have any work experience in Canada, then the language points that we're looking for to get those points would be, for example, for IELTS, you're looking for 7s in reading, writing, and speaking, and 8 in listening. But once you have the proper work experience in Canada, those language points could be a little bit lower. The work experience in Canada that I'm talking about is the kind of work experience I explained that would be for the Canadian experience class. So the one where you're working in Canada when you're not a full-time student, and you're employed in Canada as well. Foreign work experience you gained working for a foreign company that's high skilled can count. And your spouse's education, language, and Canadian work experience points, depending on whether your spouse is a super spouse or not, they may add or take away some points. Provincial nominee program, we're going to talk about that. It's not every provincial nomination that will give you 600 points, but certain programs that are express entry linked, if you get nominated by the province, you'll get 600 points, and that will automatically get you an invitation to apply. Previous study in Canada that will give you 15 points for Sault College. Arranged employment points you don't get based on the post-grad work permit. You can only get that if you have an LMIA or employer-specific work permits. If you have brothers or sisters who are Canadians or permanent residents, you get a few points for that. If you're fluent in French, that can be significant. So be sure to do a French exam and trade certification for the trades. So now, once we look at these points, some of you may be in a very good position. Others may not be in such a good position. Let's look at some of the alternatives. I want to first examine, I think Zia, this is you.
Yeah, so like Elizabeth said, when you're looking at the express entry system, some of you may be thinking, okay, well, how am I going to get enough points? How am I going to be able to apply? An alternative to going through the federal programs is looking at the provincial programs. In Ontario specifically, there are streams that work with express entry and those that are outside of express entry. For the express entry streams, the first step is that you have to actually be in the express entry pool. So everything that Elizabeth was just talking about, you do have to start with, you do have to get into the express entry pool. From there, the next step is to wait for Ontario to issue what's called a notification of interest. So this is a letter from the province that basically says, hey, we're interested in you, come apply to us. It's only after you've received a notification of interest that you can then prepare and submit an application through one of Ontario's express entry streams. Now, what are these streams? Well, Ontario has 3 categories that fall under their express entry streams. The first is called the Human Capital Priorities Program. For this program, and I'm not going to go through all the requirements for any of the express entry programs, but one of the main requirements is that you do have to have at least a bachelor's degree. So you can have a bachelor's degree or higher, it could be a master's, but the minimum requirement is that you have a bachelor's degree. What Ontario has been doing with the Human Capital Priority stream is that they go into the express entry stream, they create a smaller group of people based on who meets Ontario's requirements, in this case, in terms of the Human Capital Priority stream, who meets those particular requirements. And then from there, they do draws. However, when they're doing the draws, they're looking at both your CRS scores, and they're also looking at your occupation of experience. So Ontario has been doing draws that really either fall under tech draws, so those that for individuals who have experience in one of their tech-based occupations, or they have other draws for other occupations. And so really you have to first go into the express entry pool, you have to qualify for, in this case, the Human Capital Priority stream, and then when Ontario does a draw, they're looking at your CRS points and also your occupation of experience. The other program that Ontario has is the French-speaking skilled worker stream. Now here, they're looking at applicants who are proficient in both French and in English. So in terms of your French score, you do have to have a Canadian level benchmark of at least 7 in all categories, along with scores of CLB 6 in all categories on your English test. So they're looking for people who have completed and are proficient in both French and English for the French-speaking stream. Additionally, in terms of your education, again, here you do have to have at least a bachelor's degree. The last stream for Ontario, in terms of their express entry streams, is their skilled trade streams. Now here, you have to actually be in Ontario, you have to have a valid work permit, and you have to have completed at least a year of experience, of Canadian work experience in Ontario, in one of their listed trades within the past 2 years. So with the skilled trade stream, we're looking at particular skilled trades occupations, which are outlined in the eligibility criteria for this program. And so you do already need to have already completed a year of work experience in Ontario in order to be eligible for this particular program. Aside from these express entry streams, Ontario also does have other streams that are completely outside of them, that don't have anything to do with express entry. With these non-express entry streams, what's important to understand is the process of applying. So in terms of the process, the first step, once you are eligible, and we'll talk about the different streams in a moment, but once you are eligible, the first step is to create a profile and enter the pool of applicants for that particular stream. So very different from the federal express entry system where you're creating one profile and you would be in any of the streams. Here, Ontario has different pools for each of the non-express entry streams. And in terms of what they do, so once you create a profile, you go into the pool of candidates for your particular stream, you're also here allocated points based on the category which you're applying under. So what this means is that Ontario has created a whole variety of points for their non-express entry streams, and which one of those categories applies depends on the particular program that you're applying through. So the way that points are allocated is going to be different depending on which stream exactly it is that you're qualified under and that you're creating your profile in. Once you're in the pool, you have a score. Then what you're doing is you're waiting for Ontario to do draws. Basically, once you're in the pool, you're waiting for a draw to happen. If you are selected, you get an invitation. Again, you get an invitation to apply. This is, again, completely outside of express entry. So you get an invitation, which then allows you to actually prepare and submit your application to the province for that particular non-express entry stream that you've applied through. In terms of the draws, we don't know exactly when Ontario does not announce in advance when they're going to be doing draws. So as soon as you do qualify, if this is a program that you're interested in, it does make sense to go into the pool as soon as possible because you don't ever know when they're going to do draws. For these non-express entry streams, Ontario this year has also been looking at occupations as well, and of course points. And so it is always beneficial to be in the pool because you never know what's going to happen in terms of when they're going to do draws and what the criteria for those particular draws are going to be. Let's take a look at some of the streams. So when we're talking about these non-express entry streams, Ontario has a few that fall under what are called the employer-based categories. So this is for individuals who have a company or a job offer who is looking to support their application for permanent residence. For all of these employer-based streams, there's requirements on the company that's supporting the application, on the job offer that you've been provided, and on the applicant themselves in terms of eligibility. So let's look at these separately. The first thing we can talk about is the company requirements. So when we're looking at the company, the business that is supporting your application for nomination through the provincial program, they do have need to be in business for at least 3 years before they're eligible to support you. Now, for employers that are outside of the Greater Toronto Area, they have to be able to show that in their past fiscal year, their gross income was at least $500,000. And at the time of application, they have at least 3 full-time employees that are either Canadian citizens or permanent residents. Those numbers change for employers that are inside of the Greater Toronto Area. The gross income requirement increases to $1 million, and they need to have at least 5 full-time employees that are Canadian citizens or permanent residents at the time that you're making your application. In terms of the job offer, the position that you're using to support your application does need to be a permanent position, and it has to be a full-time role. When we're talking about a permanent position, what that means is that there's no end date on your contract, right? So that it's for an indeterminate length. Basically means that you've been provided this position, and there's nothing that says that it's okay, it's for a 1-year role or a 2-year role, for example. There is really no end date that's listed on your contract. With these employer-based categories, like I said earlier, there's 3 employer-based categories. The first one is called the international student stream. Here, this is for students who have completed their program of study here in Ontario. You do need to apply within 2 years of your graduation, and you have to have graduated from an eligible program. When we talk about eligible programs, either you've done a 2-year program, or you've done a 1-year postgraduate program from an eligible institution here. When we talk about 1-year programs, the ones that do qualify are those that require a degree as an entry requirement for that postgraduate program. So if the admission criteria for your program says that you can have a degree or a diploma or work experience, then that ability that falls under your admission criteria, that means that program unfortunately that 1-year program will not be eligible for the international student stream. For this program, you do need to have a high skill job offer. And in terms of the salary requirements, it does have to be entry level wage. So what this means is that it's a bit lower. But when you're talking about wages, you're looking at the occupation and you're looking at your location of employment. The second employer-based stream is the skilled worker stream. Here, you need to have at least 2 years of work experience within the past 5 years, and that work experience has to be in the same occupation as your job offer. That work experience doesn't have to be in Canada, it doesn't have to be in Ontario. You just have to be able to show that you do have 2 years of experience within the past 5 years. The occupation that you're using, the job offer that you do have, has to be a high skilled position, and you have to be able to show that it meets the salary that you're being offered, meets the median wage. What we don't see here in terms of requirements for the skilled worker stream is any level of education. So there's no prerequisite in terms of what programs you've completed in Canada, or whether or not you've even completed a program of study. The skilled worker program does not have an education component in terms of the minimum eligibility criteria. The third employer-based stream is the in-demand stream. Now, with the in-demand stream, this is a little different. The in-demand stream actually has a list of occupations that qualify for this program. So this does not look at just every occupation. There's a specific list of occupations that fall under the in-demand stream. This is also one of the only streams that we see that includes low-skilled job offers or low-skilled positions. So when we look at this program, for individuals who are here working in a low-skilled position, or if you're here studying and your spouse is working in a low-skilled position, you may be able to qualify and apply through the in-demand program. Now, in terms of eligibility criteria, the applicant does need to have at least 9 months of work experience in Ontario in that same occupation. However, that work experience does not have to be with the same employer that is supporting your application through the in-demand program. So you could have completed that 9 months of work experience somewhere else, now have a job offer from a qualifying employer, and use that new job offer to apply for this program, as long as you've completed the work experience and you now do have a qualifying position. In terms of salary requirements, again, here it's the median level wage for the occupation.
So, some of these things, it's for alternatives to express entry, and we're going to talk about some other programs as well. But, with the skilled worker in demand stream, don't just think about yourself as the principal applicant. Think about your spouse, who might be able to qualify under these categories as well. And just because, you know, you don't qualify for any of this because you're studying doesn't mean that they can't find a job and qualify for permanent residence. So you kind of work as a tag team. All right, so one more alternative, and this is for students who are studying in the Sault College, Sault Ste. Marie campus. The RNIP program is a really good program if you can get the recommendation from a participating community such as Sault Ste. Marie. And to do that, you need to qualify. So to qualify, you can either have graduated from a 2-year program where you're in the community for 18 months in Sault Ste. Marie, or you have 1 year of qualifying work experience. Now that work experience can be in Canada, could be outside of Canada, but you have to have that. Now, very importantly, though, is you do need to have that qualifying job offer in Sault Ste. Marie in order to qualify for this category. Language benchmarks, most of you should qualify since you're studying in college. And settlement funds, if you're going to be working in Canada, the settlement funds can be waived for that. So this is a very good program if you can get that job offer in the community and you qualify with the eligible study program or the work experience.
Another option to look at are the caregiver programs. So we have actually 2 caregiver programs. The first is the home support worker program, and the other is the home child caregiver program. Now, with these programs, RCC has actually just recently, at the end of April, reduced the work experience requirement. It used to be that you needed 24 months of work experience. Now it's been decreased to 12 months of work experience, but it does have to be in Canada, caring either for children if you're applying through the home child care provider program, or 12 months caring for an elderly or disabled person in their home if you're applying for the home support worker program. In addition to that, you do have to have completed at least a 1-year post-secondary credential. This doesn't have to be in Canada. It can be either inside or outside of Canada. But if it is outside, you would need an assessment to say that it is equivalent. Again, this is another program to think about. Like Elizabeth was saying earlier, you can really be tag teaming with a spouse. So you could be here studying, your spouse could be getting the work experience using their open spousal work permit, and may be eligible to apply for the caregiver program even while you're still studying. So it's really important to think about all these different streams that we're talking about, not just for yourself, but maybe it may be your spouse that's ready to apply much earlier than you're done your program even of study. With the caregiver program, there's also a language component. So you do have to meet the CLB benchmark of 5. So again, lower than we've seen in some of the other programs today.
And it's something to consider. You can use your post-grad work permit to get this work experience as well. But it's very important when you come to a consultation, we'll let you know that this work experience, if you don't apply under this program afterwards, this work experience is considered low skilled. So you wouldn't be able to use this work experience for express entry. So it's kind of one or the other. So it's very important to understand what exactly you want to do and how to weigh the costs and the benefits for each program and to qualify for each program. So that being said, we have given you a lot of information, and we just wanted to offer you some practical advice on what to do with your life right now.
So first, it's really important to have a plan, right? So, you want to know what you need to do to get to your immigration goals. Today's webinars like today's webinar, they're really just the tip of the iceberg. We're really looking at it from a very high level in terms of some of the immigration programs that are available out there. Doesn't necessarily mean that this will be the best one for you, or it doesn't really always tell you exactly what you need to do. It's really important for you to sit down with an immigration lawyer who can go through your background and say, this is the best way. This is how we can apply for permanent residence for you. And these are what the steps are that you need to do to get there.
Now, once you have your plan, then you have to execute. And sometimes execution may not be that easy. Those damn language exams, sometimes you're just missing 0.5 and it just makes all the difference as to whether or not you're going to get invited to apply. You might have to study for that. You might need to do another program. You might need to look for a job that's high skilled. All of that is not easy, but it just depends on how determined you are to get permanent residence. And like Zia said, what we tell you today, it's the tip of the iceberg. And also what we tell you today can change a lot. We're going to be putting you guys all on our newsletter list. If you don't like it, you can always unsubscribe. But we put you guys on there because it's important for you to be able to receive news on changes to immigration law. And we will send out bulletins when changes happen. And they do happen a lot in immigration law. And it's important to have your life structure so that you're able to pivot if you need to with different kinds of changes.
We started talking about this right from the beginning today. Make sure that you stay in status while you're here in Canada. Really, really important because it becomes much more difficult if you lose your status. You have to try and get it back. And that really does affect when and your ability to apply for permanent residence. So really important, make sure that you're in status while you're here in Canada. And of course, in any application, really important, do not misrepresent yourself. Any application that you're applying for, it is really important to ensure that everything you're providing to IRCC is correct, is as right as it can be. And when we talk about misrepresentation, the reason is that it carries a very severe consequence with it. Individuals that are found for misrepresenting can be barred from applying to Canada for a period of 5 years. And so, of course, that does make a huge difference. And when we talk about misrepresentation, it can be as innocent as not really even understanding what a definition is. For example, one that we see come up is the definition of spouse. A lot of us will think about spouse as just being the person that you're married to, but IRCC also considers someone who you've lived with for a period of at least 1 year as your common law spouse. And so declaring them in your application, for example, is also important. So it can be something as innocent as not knowing a definition that can be problematic and can lead down the route of misrepresentation.
And finally, if your application is rejected, contact a lawyer, not a consultant, a lawyer right away, okay? The courts are very, very strict on the number of days that you have to go to court if the decision is unjust. You only have 15 days if the decision is made inside Canada to go to court and file the notice. If it's outside Canada, it's 60 days. If you go past these days, then you're out of luck to file the notice. Let's say you just want to file what we call reconsideration. You don't necessarily want to go to court, but you do want the immigration to take another look at your application. Well, you only get one kick at the can. So if you go and call the call center and they say, oh yeah, just write a letter or I'll write a letter for you, and you don't really know what to do. You write a letter and they say no. And then you want to go to a lawyer. It's going to be too late because you can only have one reconsideration. They won't even take a look at any other reconsiderations. And there's a lot of time limits, right? You only have a certain period of time before you can qualify for a postgrad work permit. You have to file a restoration of status, and that might be beyond the restoration of status if you wait too long. So make sure you contact a lawyer. Hopefully you'll be doing it right from the beginning with a lawyer. But if you didn't, and you get a rejection, make sure you hire a lawyer right away. Okay, so here is our information. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us. let us know that you're coming from Sault College, and we will give you a student discount as well. Okay. All right. Let's move on to some questions. We have some questions already. Feel free, if you have more questions, to put them into the Q&A button. Okay, so Zia, this person asks, what can be the tenure of the authorized leave that a person can take as a student?
Yeah. So in terms of the authorized leave, you can take a leave up to a maximum of 150 days from your program. Basically, and that will still allow you to continue meeting the conditions of your study permit. So 150 days. Elizabeth, what if my student permit expires a month before the end of my program? How do I apply for an extension and apply 90 days for my postgrad work permit?
So as long as you filed the extension, even if you don't have the study permit yet, you can apply for your postgrad work permit. However, I would, if you know that your study permit is going to expire before your program, go and file the extension right away, because you want to have that study permit when you apply for the postgrad work permit. If you do, then you can start working when you apply for it. If you're just on an implied status, you don't get to work while waiting for your work permit. And the work permits now take around 5 months sometimes to be issued. So you definitely want to be able to work, and you can only work if you have a valid study permit in hand when you apply for your postgrad work permit. Yeah, is it necessary to have a valid job offer in order to apply for the postgrad work permit?
No, so when you are applying for your own postgrad work permit, you don't need to have a job offer in order to be eligible for the postgrad work permit. With that being said, if you have a spouse and you're applying for your spouse's open spousal work permit based on your postgrad work permit, then yes, at that point you do need to have, you do have to be working in Canada in order for your spouse to qualify for that open spousal work permit.
Okay, so yeah, if I am completing studies in August and they get their completion letter by September and the study permit is finished in November, can they apply for the postgrad work permit in October? This is like a math question. Are they able to work between September and October period?
Okay, so if you have received written confirmation in August that you've completed your program of study, so that, like we talked about earlier, that can be your final grades being released, it can be a letter from the school, anything that indicates to you in August that you have completed your program of study, that also indicates to you that you must stop working. You cannot work once you've received any confirmation from the school that you've completed your program. If you then decide to wait to submit your postgrad work permit application till October, for example, that period between August and October, when you've already received confirmation that you've completed your program, you cannot work. Once you've applied for the postgrad work permit in October, again, assuming that your study permit is still valid, like was given in the example here, then yes, you can start working in October once that postgrad work permit is filed. Elizabeth, the next question is, can we take PTE instead of IELTS for PR?
You can only do IELTS General or CELPIP General for English for permanent residence.
So yes, except also this PTE has now been approved for, right now you can only do the IELTS and the CELPIP. PTE has been approved for later this year. We just don't know when exactly it's going to come out. So today it's only IELTS or CELPIP. Later, sometime in 2023, we're expecting to see the PTE.
Great. And do they need to take a language exam for postgrad work permit?
No.
Okay.
Liz, can PSWs apply for express entry?
It depends on where you work, really. If you're working and taking care of someone in their home, that's considered low skilled. If you're working for most institutions like hospitals or nursing homes, that can be considered high skilled. Are we allowed to work for more than 20 hours? Yeah.
So as a full-time student, right now there is a temporary policy, which is in place until the end of this year, that allows students to work beyond the 20 hours a week. If your current study permit that you hold right now, either you applied for it on or before October 7th of 2022, then yes, you are able to work beyond the 20 hours up until the end of this year. If you applied for your study permit, either your study permit or your study permit extension, so whichever one you're on right now, after October 7th of 2022, then no, you can't work more than 20 hours a week. Elizabeth, I currently have a 2-year study permit and my spouse a 2-year open work permit. Currently enrolled in a 2-year program, but considering switching to 1 year. How will that affect my work permit and post-grad work permit?
So your work permit is there, but your post-grad work permit, I'm assuming they would call it, they're saying the co-op work permit.
Well, I wonder if they're talking about the spousal open work permit.
Oh, I see. The spousal work permit is going to be valid for the entire length of time for the spousal work permit. Your study permit is going to be valid for the same length of time as what it is. But the post-grad work permit, if you do a 1-year program, you may only be eligible for the 1-year work permit. So that could have a big effect on whether or not you would qualify for permanent residence. When applying for express entry in the foreign experience criteria, can we include the work experience of our home country as well?
Yep. So any work experience outside of Canada that's high skilled can qualify for points in the foreign experience category for express entry. Elizabeth, how soon after my spouse gets a full-time job can he apply for RNIP?
It depends on when he can qualify. If he does have the work experience, then and the employer is willing to do it, then we can apply right away. So just depends on the situation, but it may be possible that we can apply for RNIP right away. So yeah, from the recommendation to a participating community, is it Sault College, Sault Ste. Marie, or what about Sault College, Dundas, which I assume is in Toronto?
So we're talking about the RNIP program?
Yeah, so I think this person is a little bit confused. The recommendation to a participating community it's from a participant. So it's a recommendation from the Sault Ste. Marie community that it qualifies for RNIP. And so you can, to qualify for it, you have to have a job offer from the Sault Ste. Marie, and you need to have either work experience, or if you don't have the qualifying work experience, you need to qualify for with an education program. The education program needs to be from Sault Ste. Marie. It can't be from the Toronto, the Toronto one. So yeah, can a spousal open work permit extension be applied together with the postgrad work permit? Considering the requirement of having a valid postgrad work permit which is valid for at least 6 months, what would be the possible solution for this transition of the company's spousal extension?
Yeah, it can be applied together. You do have to remember that the requirement, though, is that you have a job offer here in Canada in order to qualify for the open spousal work permit.
Yeah, and oftentimes you might follow it up if a person doesn't have the job offer right away, but is going to get the job offer afterwards. We might follow it up with letting them know that you have a job. The principal applicant has a job offer.
My first visa application, which was submitted in March of 2022, was refused, but then the second one, which was sent in after October. So I think this is a little bit more on the personal side. I think maybe we would recommend here that for, any situation where you're trying to figure out exactly what you qualify for, or what your status is, what your ability is, what your next steps are, like Elizabeth was talking about earlier, really important to contact a lawyer for an immigration consultation. Our email address is there on the slide right now, so certainly feel free to reach out to us, and we can certainly schedule a consultation appointment for you. The next question here, Elizabeth, while I apply for the postgrad work permit, do I need to apply for my spouse too? Will my spouse also get 3 years?
So the spousal work permit is based on the postgrad work permit. However long your postgrad work permit for, it's normally issued for your spouse. But it's very important to show that you have a job offer. It no longer needs to be a high-skilled job. You just need to have a job offer in order for your spouse to get the open spousal work permit. Wow, we finished answering all these questions. Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming here today. We really enjoyed speaking with you all. And Heather, are you there? Oh, yeah.
I am.
Great. Well, thank you so much for organizing everything, Heather. It's been fantastic.
Thank you for joining us. And I think that was a record of actually clearing the questions.
Yes.
Oh, I spoke too soon. Something popped up. I can't see the thing. Oh no, it's a thank you.
Yay. All right, you did it.
Thank you both for your time. We really appreciate it. Thanks to all the students who joined today as well. So.